Good morning, apostate land. Not all of you are apostates. Some of you are just DF'd, disassociated, or inactive. I am a Jehovah's Witness. My name is Daryl Wellberg. This video is not approved by the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania. It's not approved by the 8 faithful, wonderful, dear, loving brothers called the governing body, Faithful and Discreet Slave, located in Warwick, New York. It's not approved by any local body of elders. Jesus Christ, my King, your King, whether you want to admit it or not, and Jehovah God, all of our God over the whole world, your God, my God, whether or not you want to admit it, they approve this video. I work for them. Today we're going to discuss what should a Christian do if he's called for jury duty. Good question. And what does the Bible indicate about the death penalty? What's Jehovah's viewpoint on that? Yeah. Let's get into that. And let's find out what we're supposed to do. In some lands, the judicial system uses juries selected from the citizenry. Where this prevails, a Christian must decide how to respond when directed to report for jury duty. Many Christians have, in good conscience, concluded that Bible principles do not rule out appearing, even as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego complied with the directive of the Babylonian government to appear on a plain of Dura, and as Joseph and Mary went to Bethlehem at the direction of the Roman authorities. Daniel 3:1 through 12, and Luke 2:1 through 4. There are, though, factors that sincere Christians should consider. The use of juries is not universal. In some lands, civil and criminal cases are decided by a professional judge or a panel of judges. Elsewhere, what is known as common law prevails, and juries are part of the judicial process. Still, most people have only a vague idea of how juries are selected and what they do. So getting an overview will be helpful whether you face jury duty or not. God's people recognize Jehovah as the supreme judge, Isaiah 33:22. In ancient Israel, experienced men who were upright and impartial served as judges to resolve disputes and decide questions of law. Exodus 18:13 through 22, Leviticus 19:15, Deuteronomy 21:18 through 21. By the time Jesus was on earth, the judicial function was handled by the Sanhedrin, the Jewish high court, Mark 15:1, Acts 5:27 through 34. There was no provision for the average Jew to be on a civil jury. Other lands used juries made up of citizens. Socrates was tried by 501 jurors. Trial by jury existed also in the Roman Republic, though this was abolished under the emperors. Later, King Henry III of England provided for the accused to be judged by his neighbors. It was felt that since they knew the accused, their judgment would be fairer than procedures in which he tried to prove his innocence by combat or by surviving some ordeal. As time went on, the jury system changed into an arrangement whereby a group of citizens were to hear a case and reach a verdict based on evidence. A professional judge guided them on points of evidence. There is variety in the types of juries, the number of jurors, and what is involved in reaching a verdict. For example, in the United States, a grand jury of from 12 to 23 members decides whether there is enough evidence for a person to be indicted for a criminal offense. Not whether he's guilty of it, but whether there is enough evidence for a criminal indictment. It does not determine the guilt or innocence. Similarly, in a coroner's jury, a jury of inquest, the jurors weigh evidence to decide whether a crime was committed. Not by who, but whether just a crime. How did the person die? Well, he was strangled. Well, okay. What do you think? You think it was did he do it himself? Did he commit suicide? See, that's an inquest. When most people think of a jury, they have a mind of panel of 12 citizens at a trial, either a civil dispute or a criminal case, who hear testimony to decide guilt or innocence. This is a petite, small jury, petite. In contrast with a grand jury, generally the court sends notices to appear for jury duty to individuals selected from lists of voters, licensed drivers, or the like. Some may automatically be disqualified, such as convicted felons. I can't serve on a jury. I'm a convicted felon, an ex-convicted felon. And the mentally incompetent, of course, depending on local law. Others, such as doctors, clergymen, lawyers, or owners of small businesses, may claim exemption. Some may be exempted because they have strong personal conscientious objections to a jury service. Yet authorities are increasingly eliminating exemptions so that all are obliged to report for jury duty, perhaps repeatedly over the years. Not all reporting for jury duty necessarily sit as jurors in a trial. From a pool of persons called, they call this group of people, could be 40, 50 of them, for jury duty, some are selected at random as potential jurors for a particular case. Then the judge identifies the parties and their attorneys and describes the nature of the case. He and the attorneys examine each potential juror. This is the time to speak up if one has a conscientious reason for not serving because of the nature of that case. There's also a questionnaire that is sent out before you can tell them that you wouldn't convict anybody, you're not God, no matter what the evidence you see was. They would exempt you. The group needs to be reduced to the number who will actually sit through the trial of that case. The judge will dismiss any whose impartiality may be questioned because of possible interest in the case. Also, for instance, a man's brother could not sit on his case, or his relative. Also, the attorneys for each side have the prerogative to dismiss a few jurors. Any who are dismissed from the jury panel return to the jury pool to await random selection for other cases, maybe later on. Some Christians in this situation have used the time to do informal witnessing. After a number of days, a person's jury duty is fulfilled, whether he has actually sat as a juror or not. Christians strive to mind their own business, not getting involved in other people's matters. 1 Thessalonians 4:11, 1 Peter 4:15. When a Jew asked Jesus to judge a matter about inheritance, he responded, "Man, who appointed me judge or apportioner over you persons?" Luke 12:13-14. Jesus came to declare the kingdom of the good news, to bear witness to the truth, not to adjudicate legal matters. Luke 4:18-43. Jesus' response may have moved the man to use the method for settling disputes that was set out in God's law, Deuteronomy 1:16 and 17. Valid as such points are, responding to a direction to report for jury duty is different from involving oneself in the business of others. It is closer to the situation of Daniel's 3 companions. The Babylonian government commanded them to report to the plain of Dura, and their doing so did not violate God's law. What they did thereafter was another matter, as the Bible shows, Daniel 3:16 and 18. After God's servants ceased to be under the Mosaic law, when Jesus gave up his life and his blood was poured out, his flesh was sacrificed and his blood was poured out, they had to deal with secular courts in various lands. The Apostle Paul urged holy ones in Corinth to settle differences within the congregation. While referring to the judiciary of secular courts as unrighteous men, Paul did not deny that such had a place in handling secular affairs, 1 Corinthians 6:1. He defended himself in the Roman judicial setting, even appealing his case to Caesar. It is not as if secular courts are fundamentally wrong. Acts 24:10, 25:10, and 11. Secular courts are a function of the superior authorities. Such authorities stand placed in their relative positions by God. Otherwise, there would be total anarchy. And those authorities make and enforce laws. Paul wrote, "It is God's minister to you for your good. But if you are doing what is bad, be in fear, for it is not without purpose that it bears the sword. For it is God's minister, an avenger to express wrath upon the one practicing what is bad." He's talking about the superior authorities, the police. See, Christians do not oppose the authority as it carries out such legal functions, for they do not want to take a stand against it and receive judgments. Romans 13:1-4, Titus 3:1. And the balancing factors, Christians should consider whether they can submit to certain demands made by Caesar. Paul counseled, "Render to all the superior authorities their dues. To him that calls for the tax, the tax. To him who calls for the tribute. To him who calls for fear, such fear." Romans 13:7. That is as straightforward as to a monetary tax. You can't get no more straightforward than that. If Caesar says that citizens must give up their time and efforts to clean roads or perform other work that is among Caesar's functions, each Christian must decide whether to submit. Matthew 5:41. Some Christians have viewed jury service as rendering to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. Luke 20:25. In jury duty, the task is to hear evidence and offer an honest opinion on points of fact or law. For example, on a grand jury, the jurors decide whether the evidence warrants someone's being brought to trial, not whether they're guilty. They do not determine guilt. What of a common trial? In a civil case, the jury might award damages or compensation. In a criminal case, they are to determine whether the evidence supports a guilty verdict. Sometimes they recommend which sentence stipulated by law should be applied. Then the government uses its authority to express wrath upon the one practicing what is bad, or to inflict punishment on evildoers. 1 Peter 2:14. What if a Christian does not feel that his conscience permits him to serve on a particular jury? The Bible does not mention jury duty, so he cannot say it is against my religion to serve on any jury. So please don't put that in the form. It is not against your religion if you are Jehovah's Witness. Depending on the case, he might state that serving on a jury for a particular case is against his personal conscience, based on his religious convictions. That might be so if a case involves sexual immorality, abortion, manslaughter, or another issue on which his thinking is shaped by Bible knowledge, not by mere secular law. In reality, though, it is quite possible that the trial he is selected for does not involve such issues. A mature Christian would also reflect on whether he would share any responsibility for the sentence rendered by judges. Compare Genesis 39:17-20 and 1 Timothy 5:22. If a guilty verdict is in error and the death penalty is imposed, would a Christian on the jury share blood guilt? Exodus 22:2, Deuteronomy 21:8, Jeremiah 2:34, Matthew 23:35, and Acts 18:6. At Jesus' trial, Pilate wanted to be innocent of the blood of this man. The Jews readily said, "His blood came upon us and upon our children." His blood come upon us and upon our children. Matthew 27:24-25. Do you think that dissolved or absolved Pontius Pilate from guilt? No. If a Christian reported for jury duty as directed by the government, but because of his personal conscience declined to serve in a particular case, despite the insistence of the judge, the Christian should be prepared to face the consequences: contempt of court, a fine, or imprisonment. 1 Peter 2:19. In the final analysis, each Christian faced with jury duty must determine what course to follow. based on his understanding of the Bible and his own conscience. Now, some Christians have reported for jury duty and have served on certain juries. Others have felt compelled to decline, even in the face of punishment. Each Christian has to decide for himself what he will do, and others should not criticize his decision. Galatians 6:5. Now let's take another case, another question. What does the Bible indicate about capital punishment, the death penalty for criminals? Understandably, each of us might have our own personal feelings on this based on your experience or situation in life. Yet, as Jehovah's Witnesses, we should try to conform to God's thoughts about capital punishment, while remaining neutral regarding the political stands that might take on this issue. To put it pointedly, in his written word, God does not indicate that capital punishment is wrong. Early in human history, Jehovah shared his thoughts on the matter, as we read in Genesis chapter 9. This involved Noah and his family, who became ancestors of the entire human family. After they came out of the ark, God said that they could eat animals. That is, animals could be killed, drained of their blood, and eaten. Then in Genesis 9:5 and 6, God said, besides that, your blood of your souls shall I ask back. From the hand of every living creature shall I ask it back, and from the hand of man, from the hand of each one who in his brother shall I ask it back, the soul of a man. Anyone shedding man's blood, by man will his own blood be shed. For in God's image he made man. So Jehovah authorized capital punishment in the case of murderers. While God dealt with Israel as his people, various other serious offenses against divine law were punishable by death. In Numbers 15:30 we read this broad statement: the soul that does something deliberately, whether he is a native or an alien resident, he, speaking abusively of Jehovah, in that case that soul must be cut off from among his people. But what about after the Christian congregation was set up? We know that Jehovah authorized human governments to exist, right? Romans 13:1. And he called them the superior authorities. In fact, after advising Christians to be obedient to such governmental authorities, the Bible says that such serve as God's minister to you for your good. Without police, there would be total anarchy. Without firemen, without, other government programs, street cleaners, garbage in some. Imagine what there would be. And then it goes on. But if you are doing what is bad, be in fear, for it is not without purpose that it bears the sword, for it is God's minister. Talk about these superior authorities. An avenger to express wrath upon the one practicing what is bad. Romans 13:1-4. Does that mean that governments are authorized to take the lives of those who commit serious crimes? From the words at 1 Peter 4:15 we read, we would have to conclude, yes, it does. In that passage, the apostle exhorted his brothers, let none of you suffer as a murderer or a thief or an evildoer or as a busybody in other people's matters. Did you note that none of you suffer as a murderer? Peter did not suggest that governments had no right to make a murderer suffer for his crime. On the contrary, he indicated that a murderer might rightly receive due punishment. Would that include punishment by death? It could. This is clear from Paul's words found in Acts chapter 25. Jews had accused Paul of offenses against their law. In sending his prisoner, Paul, to the Roman government, the military commander reported, as noted in Acts 23:29. I found him to be accused about questions of their law, but not charged with a single thing deserving of death or bonds. After 2 years, Paul found himself before Governor Festus. We read at Acts 25:8, Paul said in defense, neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesars, have I committed any sin? But now focus on his remarks about punishment, even capital punishment. We read, and please turn with me there, at Acts 25, 10 and 11. Again, I'm going to read from the New World Translation of the Holy Scriptures, but it doesn't matter what Bible you use. Acts chapter 25, and 11. And it reads, but Paul said, I am standing before the judgment seat of Caesar, where I ought to be judged. I have done no wrong to the Jews, of which you are also becoming well aware. If I am really a wrongdoer, I have committed anything. If I am really a wrongdoer and have committed anything deserving of death, I do not beg off from dying. But if there is no substance to the accusations these men have made against me, no man has the right to hand me over to them as a favor. Paul made one mistake here. He appealed to Caesar. He says, next sentence there, for I appealed to Caesar. Then Festus, after speaking with the assembly of councillors, replied to Caesar, you have appealed, to Caesar you will go. It's quite possible that Festus would have released Paul. Paul, standing before a duly constituted authority, admitted that Caesar had the right to punish wrongdoers, even to execute them. He did not object to punishment in his case if he were found guilty. Furthermore, he did not say that Caesar could use capital punishment only for murderers. Admittingly, the Roman judicial system was not perfect, nor are human court systems today. Some innocent people back then, and even today, have been convicted and punished. Even Pilate said about Jesus, I found nothing deserving of death in him. I will therefore chastise and release him. Yes, even though the government authority admitted that Jesus was innocent, this innocent man was executed. Luke 23, 22 through 25. Such injustices did not move Paul or Peter to argue that capital punishment is fundamentally immoral. Rather, God's thought on the matter is that as long as the superior authorities of Caesar exist, they bear the sword to express wrath upon the ones practicing what is bad. If they get it wrong, they'll eventually answer to God. That includes applying the sword in the sense of employing capital punishment. But when it comes to the controversial question of whether any government of this world should exercise its right to execute murderers, genuine Christians remain carefully neutral. We're not going to get into the politics of it. Unlike the clergy of Christendom, they keep out of any debate on this subject. Isn't that wise counsel? Jehovah God obviously allows capital punishment for certain crimes, and for the governments to make up the rules. And if these governments get it wrong, they're going to answer to Jehovah God. Pontius Pilate was not absolved of his executing or ordering the execution of an innocent man. And neither will the governments of today. Such wise counsel we find from the Bible, don't we? So if you're on jury duty, if you get the little paper for jury duty, don't say your religion forbids you to stand on a jury. That's a lie. Your religion doesn't forbid you. But you can say your conscience, based on biblical information, precludes you from standing on a jury or sitting on a jury. I don't ever have to worry about that, but some of you will in time, because you're going to be called to jury duty. And what you do is between you and Jehovah God, not you and your brothers, not you and the faithful slave, not you and the branch. It's between you and him. You do what your conscience tells you to do. Thanks for watching this video, and have a nice day.